All right, AC2, we've done it. We're here. The last time you have to hear me give PowerPoint lectures of the year. All right? Dry your eyes. I know you're sad. I'm a little sad too. All right? But since this is our last time of me lecturing you, and I know you guys are all on the edge of your seats listening to this, you're probably like, how's Mr. Peck going to finish it out? What are we going to talk about for the last lecture of the year? What's it going to be? Well, I did a poll with some of you guys, and you guys all said you wanted to talk about hippies. Actually, I didn't take a poll. None of you guys said that, but that just happens to be what we're going to be doing. All right? So, the last lecture for us for the year is going to be on hippies. All right? Now, you may be saying, Mr. Pett, hippies, what's that have to do with Vietnam? They were a very big part of Vietnam. All right? As far as the protests, the demonstrations, the marches, all those things. All right? So, let's take a look at hippies. This will start for you guys on slide 47. It is called counterculture. I apologize if you are hearing noise in the background. My wife is doing something with boxes. She's being very inconsiderate as I am trying to teach you. It's kind of the equivalent of when you guys are texting on your phones when I'm trying to teach. You're really not paying attention and it's being distracting. Like this noise I'm hearing of boxes being ripped apart in the next room. It's very distracting. It's very rude. It's very inappropriate. But you know what? We're going to press on. We're going to press through. All right? So, counterculture. Okay. Group of young Americans in the 60s that rejected conventional customs and mainstream culture. Okay? Here's what I find funny about the hippies, right? And listen, they had great music. Their style was okay if that's what you're into. But hippies were big on counterculture, which meant we don't like being in the norm. Right? We don't like to conform. Don't tell us how to dress. We're going to dress the way we want to dress. We're going to listen to the music we want to listen to. All these sorts of things. Yet they all dressed alike, right? It's like individual freedom, man. Yet they all dressed alike. But, hey, whatever. To each their own, right? Okay. Now, they promoted peace, love, and freedom. And they had a much freer attitude towards sex and drugs. Before the hippies, those things were looked at, sex is once you get married, and you just don't do drugs. Now, that didn't mean people didn't have sex before marriage or people didn't do drugs, but they definitely didn't talk about them, and it was definitely frowned upon. Hippies were kind of like, hey, it's as long as we're not hurting anyone and everyone's okay with it, then we're okay with it. That was their viewpoint. These were also the baby boomer generation. All right, now who were the baby boomers? You guys should know this, but in case you don't, once the troops came home from World War II, all right, not Vietnam, but World War II, they were away for a long time, and they would get married or they came home to their wives, and obviously a lot of babies were born 9 months after they came back or around that window, and it caused a dramatic increase in the number of babies being born, and it was called a baby boom, so they were called the baby boom. All right, slide 48, 60s style. Now, this isn't the style for everybody, but this was the style that most of the hippies took part in. Okay, women would wear their hair long and free, and they would wear loose-fitting clothes. Men typically, now this isn't all hippies, just a majority, I guess, or the standard look. Men would grow their hair long, and they would have beards. So if I was a hippie, I'd be in trouble. At least for the top part. Jeans, plain cotton shirts, and peasant blouses were the normal attire as well. All right. Excuse me. Next slide, sexual revolution. Hippies believed that sex should be separated from traditional family life. Now, what does that mean? Well, before them, it was you had sex with your wife, and that was it. You lived in a house together, you had your kids, and that's how that went. Hippies looked at it differently. They looked at it as, a much more open attitude towards it is the best way I can say it, okay? They also rejected traditional living patterns, and they would live in communal groups to where it wasn't just like a boyfriend and a girlfriend living together. It would be 7, 8, 9, 10 people living together. And sometimes these communal groups wouldn't be living in places that had electricity. They would use nature, like as far as bathing in lakes and those sorts of things. One of the most famous hippie communal groups actually lived in a place called Spawn Ranch just outside of Los Angeles in 1969. And they were probably the most famous hippie group ever. You may know them as the Manson family. I don't want you to think that all hippies were like that. They weren't, okay? That was an exception towards the rule. But if we're talking about famous communal groups and famous hippie families, the Manson family's right up there, all right? That's an AC3 thing, too, if you guys end up taking that class. All right, drugs. Psychedelic drugs. Most hippies would use hallucinogenic psychedelic drugs, typically marijuana and LSD. LSD also was known as acid, okay? Music. This is the last slide as far as the hippie stuff goes, and then we're going to look at the military draft. But as far as music goes, there was a giant music festival in 1969. Many of you guys probably heard of it. It was called Woodstock, and it was a 3-day concert that promoted peace and love. Now, at Woodstock was a giant field in upstate New York, right? I wish I had more time to talk to you guys more about this because it was a amazing concert for many different reasons. And if you go on YouTube, PBS did a documentary on it, and I think it's called 3 Days of Peace and Love, and it's just, phenomenal as far as how that whole thing went down. But anyway, they were only expecting about 20,000 attendees to show up, and as you can see, about 400,000 packed it in. So, that's why whenever you see like other big concerts and stuff like that, they'll end up with stock, like, as a way of saying it was like a Woodstock. They tried to do Woodstock 25 years later, and it worked in 1994. It was another 3-day concert, and some of the people from the original Woodstock performed there, as well as modern bands. And then they did it again 5 years later in 1999. Unfortunately, for many different reasons, riots occurred, and there were big fires set, and just the whole thing was terrible, and they haven't had Woodstock since. Now, last year in 2019, they were going to have the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, and but for whatever reason, it ended up getting canceled. Okay. Excuse me, I needed me some Diet Coke there. All right, now, not to be outdone, the West Coast wanted to have their own kind of Woodstock as well, and it was called the Concert at Altamont. And Altamont was led, the headlining band was the Rolling Stones. Now, they're still around today. They're still rocking. Some of them are just about 80 years old, but they still tour. They still play every year. They were going to play in Pittsburgh this year before the coronavirus messed everything up. Now, one thing about the Concert at Altamont, which doesn't necessarily have the same legacy that Woodstock does, is the concert security people hired the Hells Angels as the security force there. Now, if you've ever heard of the Hells Angels, it was typically a violent biker gang, but they were hired as security. And one of the tragedies is a man tried to get on stage during the concert, and the Hells Angels actually killed him. So when you look and remember Woodstock as this 3-day concert of peace and love, the Concert of Altamont isn't exactly remembered in the same way. All right. Wish I had more time to talk to you guys more about the hippies and the counterculture, because I think it's a fascinating topic to get into, but we're doing the best we can. All right, last slide, draft resistance. Now, one of the big things with the Vietnam War was there was a military draft, and you guys all know what a military draft is. We talked about it with the Civil War, we talked about it with World War I, we talked about it with World War II. So, you guys all know what that is, right? Vietnam was the first real war where there were major draft protests. Okay, doesn't mean that they weren't in the other wars. They were, but in Vietnam, it got really big. Okay, really exacerbated. Now, there were certain ways that you could get out of the draft. You could do the illegal way, just not go or flee to Canada, whatever it may be. But you could also do a couple other things. Now, remember, this is also assuming you passed your physical, all right? Just because you get drafted doesn't mean you're immediately in the military. You have to pass a physical, mental and actual physical. Like, is your body in good enough condition to be able to withstand it? If you passed your physical, though, and you really didn't want to go, it left you with few options, all right? Option number one, you could do what was known as conscientious objector. And what that meant was you're opposed to fighting on religious or moral grounds. All right, so you can say my religion doesn't allow me to fight. Now you may be saying to yourself, "Hey, that's a good idea, right? I'll just say, oh, it's my religion. It's against my religion. I can't do it. Well, they would have a draft board that would kind of like look into you and investigate you, if you will, to see if it really was a religious thing with you. Because a lot of young men at that time would just say that and kind of be blowing smoke. So they would do that. The most famous conscientious objector in the Vietnam War, some of you guys may already know this. His name was Cassius Clay. And Cassius Clay was a boxer. He was a heavyweight champion boxer. And in 1966 or 1967, he decided to change his name because he joined what was known as the Nation of Islam. And he ends up changing his name to Muhammad Ali. And he filed conscientious objector status. They said, you got to report anyway. And he refused to report. He didn't go. They stripped him of the world heavyweight title, and he almost went to jail. He didn't, but he almost did. And he was suspended from boxing for 3 years, but does eventually come back and he wins back his title. Another way you can get out of the draft was something that was known as a deferment, which was an official postponement of a draft while you were in college. So as long as you were in college, you couldn't get drafted. So a lot of people took 7 or 8 years in the 60s and early 70s to get that 4-year degree, if you know what I mean. All right. Now, there is no draft today. I don't think there will be anytime soon. But let's say a draft is brought back while you guys are in college. The deferment only works for that current semester, at least as of right now, unless they end up changing it. So if you end up getting drafted, I'm just going to use Elliot Wenzel. Elliot gets drafted, right? And he's in the middle of his spring semester in college. He's only allowed to stay there until that semester is over. He can't just stay in college for years and years the way they did in the 60s. It was a new rule or a new law they put into place. Okay, but like I said, you guys don't really have to worry about that kind of stuff. How did they figure out who was drafted? How did they pick it? They didn't just say, all right, I'm going to draft Noah Lobig today. Noah Lobig seems like a good guy. We'll draft him. All right. That's not how they did it. All right. They would have what was known as a lottery. And in 1969, that was the first draft lottery. And what it is, it was just like if you watch the Pennsylvania Daily Lottery at 7 o'clock before Jeopardy. They have a number of balls in a little thing. They press a button. One of the balls comes up, and it's number 11. There you go. It was almost exactly the same way. But the balls were numbered 1 through 366, okay, counting for the days of the year. 366 because of leap year. Some people were born on February 29th. The earlier your number was picked, the more likely, if you were in that age group, the more likely you were to get drafted. So what I mean by that is my birth date is December 9th, okay? December 9th is like the 300, and now I'm estimating here, so I may be wrong, so don't, tell me I don't know the date. But December 9th is something like the 349th day of the year, right? 349. So my ball would be 349 because that's the day of the year I was born. If they press the button and the first number to come out or the first ball to come out is number 349, if I'm in that age group, which is around 18 to 26, I'm packing my bags because I'm probably going to end up getting drafted, all right? If any of you guys have a birthday in January, let's say your birthday is January 17th. Your number is number 17. Now, and they would pick every single, until there was no balls left, they would pick them all right, until there was 366 balls picked. If your birthday, January 17th, number 17, was like the 300th ball picked, you're probably safe. They didn't tell you ahead of time, like, we're going to draft the first 154 numbers we picked. But the later you were picked, the safer you probably were. So if you were picked in the late 200s or 300s, you were probably okay. If the date you were born was picked in the first 10, probably going to get drafted. Okay. That is it for the notes on Vietnam. Your test is going to be put up later today, Friday. You have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to do it. All right. Tuesday is your last day. It needs to be in by Tuesday. If I start looking at you guys on Monday and I see a bunch of people that haven't turned them in yet, I'm going to start sending out messages. Get it in, so we don't turn it into zeros. Quick personal note, though. This is technically our last class together. Just want to say I already sent a message out to the seniors last night. Just want to say this to all of you guys, my sophomore class. I had an absolute blast teaching you guys this year before this whole thing started. My period 2 class, we had some awesome debates in there, and it was pretty easy to get some of you guys a little hot under the collar as far as some of our topics and coming close to getting some fights there. Period 3, you guys always had a smile on my face. Even when you were misbehaving a little bit, you always did it in a nice enough way that cracks me up. Period 8. Don't think I can say anything else about that. And period 9, some of the best students that I've ever taught. So very sorry that the year ended this way. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you guys next year. Hopefully you take AC3 or government so I can have you again next year. But even if you don't, just seeing you guys in the hall, giving you a little wave and a fist bump, asking you how your day's going, or even when you guys walk by in the hall and just say, "Hey, Mr. Pat, how's it going?" You'd be surprised how much that doesn't make my day and make me happy. So, once again, sorry that the year ended the way it did. But I love you guys. I had a blast teaching you guys. Study for this test. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please shoot me a message. And have a great, awesome summer. All right, take care. Keep punching. Bye.